All right, this is Michael with Lawrence Accountability. I'm here with Dr. Justin Spees and Andrew Cook from Hoisington, Kansas. I'm going to go ahead and let those two introduce themselves and let us know a little bit about themselves. Justin, why don't you go first?
All right. My name is Dr. Justin Spees, and I just want to say, hey, Michael, I appreciate you having us on here and the opportunity to have this talk, and of course, I appreciate everyone out there that's listening to this. Like I said, my name is Dr. Justin Spees. I live here in Lawrence, Kansas, and I'm running for Douglas County Commissioner here in District 1 as a Republican candidate. Just a little background on me: my PhD is in lifespan human development from Kansas State University. My master's is in marriage and family therapy from Kansas State as well. And then my undergrad is in addiction counseling from Washburn University. And I was an assistant professor in the Family and Human Services Department in a tenure track position up until this past spring. Prior to that, I served 9 years in the Navy. I was on a submarine. I was on an attack submarine, USS Springfield. While I was up at K-State, I became licensed as a marriage and family therapist and a licensed addiction counselor, and I worked in both of those fields. I primarily worked with children who had been sexually abused. I worked with them here at an agency here in Lawrence years ago. And then my primary field in family and humans, my PhD in lifespan human development, along with my background in marriage and family therapy and addiction counseling, allowed me to teach kind of a wide range of topics at Washburn and up at K-State as well. So I taught a range of developmental courses all the way from, early childhood all the way up to the end of life and everything in between. And
Gotcha.
then I also taught some counseling classes as well up at Washburn as well. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here speaking with you guys tonight.
And thank you, Justin. Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Okay, so my name is Andrew Cook. I have been a long-time Kansas resident, born and raised here. Initially got my start in career fields with law enforcement. I'd always wanted to be in law enforcement. Had a romantic notion of what it was at the age of 21, had a job already lined up, did that for 6 months, went to the police academy, was certified as a Kansas peace officer, did that for about 4 years, which is about how long it took to realize that law enforcement was not the romantic notion that I'd been led to believe, that it wasn't the noble career field that I wanted for my life. I realized that the fine line between a cop and a crook was more of a reality than just a lingo. But I got out of that, went into EMS full time, was there for the transformation of healthcare in 2009 during that time, and saw how the government only came in and made things absolutely worse. Finally was let out of the career field and went and started my own private business that I was happy to do, jumped through all the government hoops that I was required to jump through. Kept doing it for a couple of years till I realized year after year after year, it didn't even matter how much I tried to get away from the government kept trying to get closer and closer to me, and in specifics, my pocketbook. And so finally now you have me, a mid-30-year-old jaded libertarian who wants absolutely nothing to do with government. And that's where we are today.
Well, and I think the idea of you as a libertarian and your views, and Justin as a Republican with his views, were a good mix to really get some education out there, because it seems like we're able to talk. At least I'm able to talk to you. I'm able to talk to Justin. We've been able to talk to each other. So let's kind of get it on. One of the biggest topics that we wanted to cover was, and it's because of the elections coming up just next week.
Michael, you're really cutting out a lot, man.
Sorry about that, bud.
Quite a bit.
One of the biggest, I'm getting a note that says my internet connection is unstable. So I'm gonna say, let's do this. One of the biggest things that we wanted to talk about was the constitutional amendment that's coming up, the vote coming up. And so Justin, I want to go ahead and start with you. You're voting yes on this amendment because you believe that well, I'm not even gonna try to fill in your beliefs. You tell us what you believe.
Well, yeah, I'm voting yes because I believe that it's baby murder.
Is that the sum of your belief?
Yeah, it doesn't really need anything more than that. You know, everyone should be against baby murder because
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Can you go ahead and, or let me share the screen here.
Yeah, go ahead.
So on this particular topic, I want to just go ahead and preface this by saying that Justin and I, on a personal level, I think we believe way more in line with one another than what we believe against. Now, that being said, have you seen this document that was put out by the state of Kansas, the ballot measure itself, word for word, as it's written?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you read this, we see, let's see here. In particular, let's go with this one, because you said you're going to vote yes for this measure because it's against baby murder, right?
Yep.
Okay. So right here, a vote for the value them both amendment would affirm there is a no Kansas constitutional right to abortion or to require the government funding of abortion, and would reserve to the people of Kansas through their elected state legislatures the right to pass laws and to regulate abortion. So anywhere in there, do you see the words abolish abortion?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's saying that there's no constitutional right for it.
Correct. And I don't believe there is a constitutional right, me personally, but I'm saying focusing on this document, the actual question being asked. Do you see where they're asking the Kansans, do you want to abolish or do you want to allow?
Oh, I get what you're saying, but I mean, in there, it is saying that it essentially will, is saying that there's no right to it. So,
Correct. But it's also, if you look down here at the bottom part of this, this is granting the state the right to pass laws and to regulate abortion. Well, if I'm not mistaken, they're already passing laws and they're already regulating abortion. But specifically, and I agree with you, I believe that abortion is baby murder. But
Yeah.
when I look at this, I have to apply the rule that a vote for the lesser of two evils is a vote for evil. By voting for lesser abortion is still voting for abortion. And that's where I had the issue with vote yes. I can't give in my opinion, I can't give the state my authority that I approve of some abortion when I approve of none. And that's where I was talking when you came into this meeting tonight, that the state has a tricky way of putting this out there to us. And this has to be one of the most confusing written memorandums that we've ever been asked to vote on.
of course, yeah. And you make a good point, man. I had a friend just the other day, last weekend actually, that was talking to me about this, and I hear what you're saying, man. However, the important part in there is that it would affirm there's the no constitutional right for it. You know, I think that's the important part.
Well, and that's certainly an aspect of it. And if you go back and look at the history, which let me share my screen again, because I brought up the authoritative source, which is obviously Wikipedia is the authoritative source on anything nowadays.
Excellent.
So if we look
Excellent.
at the history, do what?
I said that's excellent. Wikipedia.
No, if we pull up the history of abortion in particular the state of Kansas, I wasn't aware of this. Back in 2013, there was actually a push at the state level to become one of 6 states to ban abortion through what they called the fetal heartbeat bill. Do you remember that one?
No.
I don't either. I remember nothing about it. But what I like about this is if you look at it, that is on the legislative level. That's a law that they could have passed in or taken out. That's not an amendment to the Constitution. And personally, I don't think that any healthcare right has a place in the Constitution. That's not where we need to be discussing healthcare at. I think that if we want to create laws can easily be changed. Constitution, oftentimes the only time it's changed is through war, which I don't agree with either. But that being said, I don't think that we need to have this in the Constitution, whether it's for or whether it's against. I'm opposed to it. And I'm particularly opposed to the part where they're talking about regulation, because the way it reads, if you read the actual change to it, they're wanting the people's consent to regulate one more industry. And as a libertarian, the one thing I am completely against is more government. I personally think we need less government, but the last thing I want to do is give my vote for a bigger government. Just regulate one more aspect of our lives. I can tell you on a personal basis, if somebody asks me, I'm telling them I don't agree with abortion all day long. I don't need my government to sway in their opinion one way or the other. But I didn't know if you were aware of that aspect to it and what the actual wording was.
So what would you see happening if no wins? What do you see?
Everything stays the same, and our Constitution stays the same. Now that doesn't mean everything
Right.
stays the same.
But that's not good though.
Oh, it's not. No, our society has devolved a long ways. What I'm saying is, with a vote no, we don't need to change 180-year-old Constitution. At that level, we need to contact the legislators, and we need to, if you and I agree that abortion is wrong, I mean, even from the first cell having formed, that's a lie, then we need to talk the term abolish, which I would support 100%. If there was a measure that came out and clearly said, do Kansans support abolishing abortion? You and I would be right there in agreement. The issue with the way they've worded this and the confusing manner, honestly, if we would take the funds that have been used to force this down our throat for the last month and a half on all the YouTube ads, the street signs that are lined up and down this small town, all the billboards, all the actual TV ads, we could have paid for all of the unborn babies many times over. But did we do that? No. They want our support for bigger government to tell us what abortion is going to be allowed, what abortion isn't. Well, shit, you and I can agree no abortion should be allowed. If we ask Mike, obviously he's got a different opinion from us, but I think on a personal level, we can all come up with that. We don't need government to, regulate our conversation.
Well, I'm going to agree and say that I don't want more government. And I'm also going to acknowledge what you said is that I am voting no, because I believe that the woman should have the choice. And it has nothing to do with what you were describing about the intent of government, but I would support that position as well. Justin, talk about your views of more government. I mean, do you think government needs more power over us? Do you think, I mean, tell us about that opinion and what you're thinking about the fact that a yes vote gives the government more power.
Well, obviously, I mean, I think that I'm not for more government, but I got a question, Andrew. Did you say that you said the two things you said, that the Constitution is only changed through you say it was like war, and then also that the Kansas Constitution hasn't been changed in 180 years? Is that what you said?
No, not that it hasn't been changed in 180 years. That it was approximately, I can't remember, 1860, whenever ratification came through, and it was originally created. And I said it was more easily changed through wars. Constitutions are usually toppled before they're reformed internally through a voting process or a legislative process. So the last thing I want to do is go through a 3/4 majority. Let's get this written into the Constitution. And if it does finally pass that way, then likely that's going to be the law of the land. And I don't think the law of the land is any place for abortion, yay or nay. I think that is something, I think morality is best left out of the government realm, if you will.
Well, see, I think that's where we could disagree there as well, because I mean, and then kind of going back to the question Michael just asked me is, there shouldn't be a right to kill anybody, and I think anytime that's not in place, that's a great thing. I definitely think that morality and government and culture, I mean, they're all aligned, and we can't have a government that doesn't have morale. We can't have an amoral government that's outside of that. Of course they influence one another.
When you say we do have an amoral government, I mean, the government itself is not moral by any stretch of the imagination. Like I was telling Mike the other night, you know, we have a law that says, oh, you're muted, I think.
Who, me?
No, I'm not
Oh,
talking.
okay. I thought you were talking. I couldn't hear you.
No, you go ahead.
No, so we have a law that says murder is illegal.
Right, right.
You know, that's one of the oldest laws we've had on the books. That's one thing we can all agree. At what point has that law ever stopped somebody from being murdered? The law itself doesn't. I mean, you can be convicted and punished afterwards, but the law itself doesn't actually stop the murder from occurring.
Yeah, it does. It's a deterrent.
I would agree with Justin on this one, that the laws against murder actually do act as a deterrent.
Okay,
Because
so let me ask you something. Of all the people that have been murdered in the last 20 years, how many were saved by that law?
well, and that's not the point of the law, though.
None of them. But
You see what I'm saying? The point of the abortion law is to save the lives of the children. And
Well,
so,
okay, we're going to stray off into death penalty then. If death penalty, that's used as a deterrent for some of the larger crimes. So are you believing that death penalty is murder and that it should never happen?
I believe personally that the death penalty is murder. Now, I don't believe, according to the way the laws are written, it's used as a deterrent. It's used as a punishment for the crime. It's on an individual basis for each crime. And that's why it's not broadcast out and used to deter future crime.
So
It
you
may
don't think
have
that there's ever a
effect, but it's
time
not
where,
the way it was designed.
do you not think that there's ever a time where somebody thinks about killing somebody and decides not to because of what they would have to suffer if they got caught?
And they may, but I'm here to tell you that 100% of the people that murdered in the last 50 years weren't saved by the state passing a law saying this shall not happen.
Fair enough. But Justin, I wanted to chime in and ask you, because one of the things that you talked about just there, talking about the amendment issue, you were discussing the role of government and how government and everything is intertwined. One of the most predominant things about how you became known around here is because of your protest against what government did. Now, how do you reconcile those two views?
Reconcile the two views. Where's
Well,
the
the idea that government has a role, but then when government plays its role, it's invading and violating and such.
Oh, well, you know, I think it plays a role in you know, in terms of what our morals reflect as Americans from when it was founded, right? So morality in terms of like doing the right thing, freedom, all of those things. And so when I talk about doing the right thing, that means including things that we find that are laws right now, like don't murder, don't rape, don't steal. Yeah, I think that the government has definitely has a role in that, and I think that our founding fathers used their Christian beliefs, their morality, obviously, clearly to frame it all. And I think that that's a very, you know, it's a very good thing. I really do. I think that when we start to lose morals, and we can lose it in a lot of different ways. We can lose it from, you know, not becoming as religious as we are. We can lose it through succumbing to relativism, where anything goes. And I think once the morals go out of our society, I think, you know, what you said earlier is that, you know, we see a government that doesn't have morals. Yeah, we do, and it's not good. But I'm not saying like the government as it currently is with the elected officials. I'm talking about the government itself. You know, has some good, you know, in terms of the morality that it reflects in our society. So it's a good thing to live in a society that doesn't want to kill each other and supports punishments for that. And you know, the death penalty is one. Yeah, I do support it. I think that there's crimes out there that are so grotesque. And honestly, I think that we could probably even a step further. I mean, we talk about crimes against children and some of the stuff about that. The fact that we think it's, you know, I just think that those are so terrible that as a society, we should do everything we can to prevent those. And if one of those things is making it a very strict penalty, I do believe it is a deterrent. I absolutely do believe it's a deterrent.
Can you
And
legislate morality though?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Can you legislate morality?
Yeah, for
How?
sure. Well, one we're talking about abortion right now. You can legislate that. Or we could just stick with the topic of murder. Yeah, you can legislate that.
No matter what the morality is, no matter which moral, how are you going to regulate that? I mean, you're going to have a single agency that's going to define that this is good, this is bad. And that's the whole reason I talk about keeping government out of morals. And I do agree with you 100% that our whole society is devolved at this point. The morals that I was raised with on a rural Kansas dairy farm are not the sort of morals I see playing out with my neighbors or in my communities nowadays, or in your community when I was up there this last weekend. It's just we're losing those in this country. The difference is I don't think those morals come from government, and I don't think they should come through the K through 12 5,000 hour indoctrination course. I think historically those have come from our families, those have come from our churches, those have come from the communities. And just one quick point, obviously churches are at all-time lowest regular attendees now than any other time in history. We can see it in our communities. I won't even get into my local school district that's right across the street from me, but I have had some major issues with the length of outfits that both the men and the women that are on certain teams wear. I think that those should not be being paid for with taxpayer dollars, in particular my property taxes. But I went up and knocked on a neighbor's door, and they were shocked. What was I doing at their door? Well, in my lifetime, when I was little, I remember we would actually walk up, knock on the door, and oftentimes it wasn't that you wanted to talk to the people inside, but mom sent you over with something to give back. And, well, hey, come on in. Do you want water? Do you want tea? Sit down, have a spell. Well, now you just walk up to somebody's door and knock on it. There's a level of shock there. Why didn't you call first? What? And I don't understand when our communities change in such a way, but I think we need to get back to those times, not rely on government to.
Yeah. I got a question about that though. So you're saying that our morals, our values are instilled through our family, and I agree with that. I'm not disputing all that. But if our government is representative of us, then we should be sending people that have those morals that are taught from their family. I mean, they should be reflecting that. And I think that gets into it. Obviously, when that person goes up to wherever they're at in the government, as an elected official, that's guiding who they are, and the people that I wanted that. Yeah, for sure.
It is 100%. And here's my issue with what I'm presented with when I go to the polls. I haven't voted in the polls in the last 3 years. And the reason for that was I came across a saying one time that said, a vote for the lesser of two evils is a vote for evil. And I started researching that, and I started researching my candidates, and none of the candidates that were being offered to me at these election processes were the ones I wanted. Now, when I took a look at all of the candidates that wanted that position, that had an agenda that fit and aligned with my agenda, the people that I was choosing were getting weeded out early on. And so by the time it came to pick, you've got the right boot of tyranny, you got the left boot of tyranny. Which one do you want? Well, this one's going to go a little easier when his boot falls on my neck. Either way, they're both tyranny, and I honestly don't want either one. And that's what I realized was voting. It truly is picking the lesser of two evils, which at the end of the day is still casting my vote for evil. So.
Well, what can be done about that then?
I think we have to get back to the moral society, what you and I were talking about. And that's why I think you and I honestly have more of an alignment with our personal views on things. I just, at this point, don't think any of it can be solved through government. I think we were warned about that by the forefathers, and that's why there were so many constrictions put on them. But in particular to this ballot measure that we're looking at, this is one more way government is trying to confuse the masses. I want to share my screen here and show you one more thing, particularly to do with this vote. But this right here sums up exactly what I think is being done with this vote. You can sway 1,000 men by appealing to their prejudices quicker than you can convince one man by logic. And what I see happening is everybody in the state of Kansas is going to have a view on abortion. Whether you're so far this way or you're so far this way, you're going to believe strongly about your opinion. And what they've done is they've used that prejudice against us so that when we walk in, what we're ultimately voting for is bigger government. We're asking for more regulation. And that's the issue. I don't want government getting any larger. I think they're as big as what they should be, and they even need to be made smaller. But I think they're tricking us with this question. Even though you and I both agree 100% that abortion is murder, and murder from the very beginning stages, they're being tricky in this questioning and getting you and I, if we fall for it, to choose to vote for varying degrees of what you and I feel is wrong at every level.
So tell me again how you see the government getting bigger on this. Where are you seeing it at?
Oh, let me share this. Let me bring up the actual verbiage of what they're wanting to put in, which is right here. So this is the actual words that they're wanting to write into the Kansas Constitution. And if we
Andrew, we're not there. It is. Okay, you're up now.
do what?
We couldn't see you at first, but now you're up. Go ahead.
Oh, so this part right here is where they're wanting us to vote for the regulation of the abortion industry. And this is the particular issue. If it said right here that through our elected leaders, we want it to be known that Kansas abolishes abortion, I'd vote yes all day long. But that's not what they're saying. They're asking for our permission to regulate one more industry, pass laws. Well, they can already pass laws. They have that ability. They've done that in the past. What they're asking to do is codify this in the Constitution. And I can't throw my support for taking over one more industry. I just can't support government getting.
In what way do you think it's going to be regulated then? If this goes,
I honestly don't know. So if we go back to, let me find.
Well, guys, the reality of this is we don't know how it's going to be regulated because what they're doing, they're asking for the means to regulate, but they're not saying how they're going to do it.
Correct. And that's where the issue is. It could
yeah,
be.
but I'm saying what I know what Republicans have said they're going to do, but what do you think is going to happen?
I honestly, personally think that there's no way the legislators in the state of Kansas would ever attempt abolishment of abortion. I think it's far too lucrative of an industry, and I think that would be immediate career suicide for them if they tried. I also think they're going to try to appeal to the Kansans who are on the right-leaning side enough that they're going to put in some measures that say, see, we stopped funding for it, so your tax dollars never go to it. See, we limited these late-term abortions that everybody can agree is at the very least iffy. So we're gonna outlaw that. But in the meantime, we're gonna allow from the point of conception up to wherever they draw that line in the sand. And I don't want to cast my support for this portion here. And that's the reason, honestly, I choose not to vote as opposed to even voting no. But right here where it says they want to regulate that industry, that's where I'm lost on it.
You know, and I have to chime in there as well, because you made a point the other night, Andrew, about the regulation of industry, and what industry has the government gotten involved in where the regulations have gone the way they expected them to go
and made it better.
And made it better, exactly. Justin?
Yeah, man, I think that's a great point, man. I think that's a great point. And I just want to go back to your lesser of two evils. You're talking about who to vote for, and I was asking, well, what can be done about that? I mean, are we just supposed to go along with that forever? I mean, at some point we got to actually, try to change that, right? By maybe running ourselves.
The one thing I love about these YouTube guys that get on and they talk about freedoms and all this, I'm not calling for violence. Well, I'm not calling for violence, but I do have to ask, with everything that Dr. Justin was taught his K-5 indoctrination course, or K-12, sorry.
Well, I'm going to, and I know where you're headed, but I'm going to interject from the YouTuber standpoint. If we don't say we're not calling for violence, we get accused by the government that we're calling for violence.
Exactly. I know, and I understand. That's why I threw it in there. I'm not calling for violence. But in the history that we're taught, at what point did the United States, well, it wasn't the United States at that time, but did a group of like-minded individuals get together and say, you know what, we're going to write a declaration and we're going to FedEx that right on over to a king and say, we're done with the overregulation, we're done with the overtaxation, and we're going to start it over ourselves. And what ensued? Well, we had to have a war to codify that. And
Okay,
so,
but now let's look at this last election, for example. You know, when we're talking about the people being fed up and ready to resort to those violent methods that we used to achieve our independence in the 1700s.
Yep.
Was that not part of what January 6th was? And then
I don't believe it was.
Okay, so if those were like-minded individuals that rose up, and now I want to make a point here because you just said you didn't. I was honestly expecting you to say that you did think it was something similar to that, but there's a certain amount of the population that out there that believes, and as somebody that grew up in my 20s being daily exposed to what was going on in Waco for 50 however long days, and daily exposed to what happened on Ruby Ridge, and daily exposed to what happened with the Amon Bundy Ranch. You know, these are times where like-minded individuals tried to rise up and they were put back down, and now we all look at them as criminals, and it's very much similar. The society as a whole looks at them as criminals, and then you have the January 6th crowd, where I think there's going to be a larger majority that's going to look at them as criminals only because of how that got started. But those are like-minded individuals trying to do those things, and not a one of them has a chance at success. And I will say again, the people that choose to stockpile weapons and things like this, thinking that they're going to resist the government. You know, when the government shows up on your door with a tank, your collection of 45s and AKs isn't going to stop anything.
Exactly. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
All I was saying when I was asking what can be done about it, I wasn't saying go to that. I was saying, like, why don't you run for office? I mean, we ain't got why do we want to go up against the system is already in place that will allow us to, you know, do whatever you want. Whatever you're saying, getting control back, the system is already in place. All you have to do is insert yourself into it and try as hard as you can. And I mean, as hard as you can, because it is going to be hard. And I think that deters a lot of people from wanting to do it. And then it's really easy to say, well, it's the lesser of two evils. Well, you know, you can run.
I ran for office in 2009. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So in 2009, keep in mind, I was a 23-year-old, young, dumb, I won't even finish that, cop. And I was fed up with the sheriff in our county. And I had already gone in a high-speed pursuit with his son. It was a DWI incident. And you can bet that it was swept under the rug. And I had issues with that. I had big issues with that. That was my case, and it was taken out of my hands at the top level of my police department. And so I decided I'm going to do the one thing I can do, and I ran against the sheriff. The sheriff himself, not only with what was going on with his son, but he was having issues with domestic violence, which I 100% do not agree with. As an officer, I'm supposed to show up to couple A's house and treat them the same as when you show up to the sheriff of the county's house. That's not the way that went down the day that his wife called for assistance, and it started to be swept under the rug. I'd had enough with the corruption. So I went ahead and ran for office. I was too late for getting in on the ballot, so I went on a write-in campaign. Actually ended up with about 10% of the county's votes. But what I did was cause enough of a rile up about it. We had enough news media coverage that another gentleman who was better known than I was able to get in. I still don't agree that he was the right person for the job, but at least we got the greater of the evils out. The guy we had for the next 4 years wasn't committing crimes, and he didn't do anything to limit the crime in the county, but at least we got a guy who is not out there actively being a criminal at the same time he's supposed to be sworn to be against it. The thing is, since that time in 2009, I've become so weary of the government that not only do I not want any part of it, I don't want to be a part of it. If I can find a moral person, if I can find a Justin who believes the way I do and says that he's going to honor the oath he takes and actually show up and do that job, I'll support him 100%. The issue I have is Justin never makes it to the ballot. Never. He doesn't have the funding behind him. He doesn't have the support behind him. You don't have as many road signs to put out or YouTube ads to flood the airwaves with. And so by the time election day shows up and I'm forced into my little cubicle, you're not there. That's where I see the issue with voting. I see it more as a selection process, not an election process.
Justin, I mean, you and I have talked a number of times about the likelihood. Do I think you're going to get elected?
Yeah. What are you saying, Michael?
Well, I'm asking you, you're running, you're persistently running, and he's really right, man. With the way we are in this country, that look back at Ross Perot and chicken math, and then look at Ralph Nader, and look at all the other third party or off party candidates that have tried to come in and be a part of the political system. And what I've seen is that both parties jump on them, and it becomes a let's get rid of this guy so that we can duke it out.
Yeah, we because they're just more of the same, man. They're just more of the same. Like what I envision like would be great for more everyday average day or average Americans just running for office is they don't look like politicians, they don't talk like politicians, they talk like Americans, they talk like what we want to hear. We can't relate to those politicians, and that's why I don't think there's anything that could overcome that lesser of two evils like you're talking about there as is, unless we start running people that shock the system. I get it. Trump was that, but he was also he looked like a politician as well. I'm saying like people just if we ran and were authentic in who we were, I think it would give people they would look at it and say, well, maybe this isn't the same old the lesser of two evils here. Maybe that'll inspire more people. We have to step up. I don't think we can start just abandoning stuff and either running away from the system or wanting to tear it down or not participate in it. I think it would be a mistake not to want to participate in it.
So if we want to keep government, which I think nobody's ever going to want to enter into a voluntary society and be complete anarchy, which
there's a lot of people that would say they do.
There's some, but I don't think a lot. I think the majority want that sort of
for sure
government role to say, hey, you do good, you do bad. So what if we did this instead? Can we agree that if we bring the issues from the federal level down to our local level, and so now Justin Lawrence doesn't think that abortion's right, so the people of Lawrence get together and they keep it out there. Andrew doesn't believe it's right. The people in Hoisington, work to keep it out. That way we're handling things on a local level where it's closer to you and your community. It's closer to me and my community, as opposed to having it dealt with in this particular case. And I was talking to Mike, was Roe v. Wade was one decision that then blanketed over 330 million people. Whereas when they overturned that, now they send it back to the states. And regardless of what decision each state makes, there's now 50 different decisions that if you don't like what's happening in one state, you have the freedom to move to another. And if you take that to a more local level, how many counties do we have in the state of Kansas? Now we can feel free to roam about and actually live in the society that we think most aligns with our beliefs.
No, although I do, I am in favor of states' rights, obviously, but I just think on this example of abortion, because I think it's murder. It should be not allowed. Obviously.
Well, and that's the way I do. But if we take this to, we were talking about Common Core the other night when we talked on the phone.
Well, let's not skip off on that though. Let's look at what he just said. It's murder. It's wrong. Well, murder's already illegal.
It is.
Yeah.
We just got to find people that are willing to enforce the laws that we currently have.
But that's where I don't understand what abortion is. Like, murder is already illegal. If we could all agree, as it obviously is, murdering a baby, why are we? It should just be illegal.
Well, and when you say murdering a baby, you're There's some lines there.
No,
Well, and when you define a baby, let's define the baby then.
you don't have to get caught up on the word baby. You just get hung. All you have to do is focus on that it's a human being.
Murder of life. And I believe, along with Justin, that it's at the time of conception. That's the way my personal beliefs happen. And so if you're willing to take a life, in my opinion, that fits easily the murder statute.
Yeah, and I think this goes beyond belief, because it'll always. I mean, just believing it. I mean, it's common sense, but it's also it's science. The party of science on the left. I mean, what else are we talking about here if we ain't talking about a human life?
Well, and if we're going to go there, let's talk about the 10-year-old.
Well, I mean, sure. I want to start off by saying I think that's just it's an example that's just is awful to think about a 10-year-old, and I get it happens.
Well, and it's completely illegal that it happens, but it doesn't stop it from happening.
Right. What I'm saying is, I think a couple of things on this one particular example. I think that it's used to pull at everyone's heartstrings, obviously.
Kind of like it's prejudice used to fool the masses.
What's that?
Well, going back to that quote that I had earlier, they picked the one prejudice that we all have so that they can sway the opinions all the way.
Yeah. And so this is where the moral issue comes into it. Not whether it's life or not. This is where a moral issue comes into that, because I grant that those things happen. It happens, but I would also say it's very rare. Very rare for a lot of different reasons, but very rare. And I think it's specifically used to pull at our heartstrings. And how could you possibly say, oh, that 10-year-old needs you evil person, that 10-year-old possibly be forced to have that baby?
So then, are you agreeing to some exceptions to the abortion law then?
No, where I'm saying that where it becomes a moral issue, not that it's a baby or not, is that, so are we supposed to then sacrifice millions of babies? I mean, we're talking 50, 60 millions of babies for this one
exception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's called a moral issue. Do you say 50 million, or I mean, and the reason why I don't like to use this example is it's so grotesque. There's no way to talk not even positively about it. But what I'm saying is, yes, that is very traumatic experience for that child. I get that, but it doesn't mean that it's the end of the world for that child. I mean, there could be a lot of positive things not that come out of that issue, but that person's life, whether because they endured it and they lived and maybe they changed other lives in the future. I get all that, and so that's to me where the moral issue comes, where it should come. It doesn't come for me, but it should come, is that how many people are we talking about sacrificing in this one instance?
So can I interject something in there, because you're very passionate about this, and that passion comes across. And you and I are so far on track, it's not even funny. And so that's why I am of the opinion that I don't want to be the moral decider of what should happen to that 10-year-old. That was a horrific incident, and it should be up to that individual and the parents, the household, the family unit, to determine. If we go with a federal decision, if let's say federally abortion was banned and there was no exceptions, no nothing, that's going to limit what their response is, how they're going to treat that trauma. If there's 50 different decisions, and so let's say they leave their state, they fly across the country to where they have the choices that they feel are best for their child and their family, and they're able to take care of it, that's where freedom comes in. And I don't feel that I have the right to force my views on anybody, including that one, through a state, the Constitution mandate anymore. I think the more freedom we have as individuals, the better off as a people we are. And that's where, when you and I talked about morality can't come from the government at that level. Morality has to be birthed in our families, in our communities, in our churches. And so once we get back to the way you and I grew up, and even before then, that's not going to come from the federal government. That's going to come from us in our communities. But the more decisions we have, the more freedoms we have, the better off we're all going to be. including the three of us talking here about these topics tonight.
Are you saying that it would be all right to live in a society where the government doesn't come? I mean, there are things that we should be glad that the government, I mean, there's
What I'm saying is
no way that we should value quote the freedom to do whatever we want in terms of, and there are things that we can all agree on, like I mean, things that are done to children. I mean, we can't all be like, no, you got the freedom to do it if you want to do it.
Well, let's go back to the 5-year-old comment from our phone call. You remember that phone call?
Me?
Yes. When you and I were talking up there in Lawrence, and we were talking about the 5-year-old in the park. You remember that instance?
The 5-year-old in the park? No, I don't know if I was. That's why I was like, me. I don't know if I was on that call, but maybe if you could refresh my memory.
Well, no, we were talking. Does a person have the right to abuse this 5-year-old? You're walking along the park and you see an adult take advantage of a 5-year-old.
Right.
That was the question you presented me with. And
Okay.
in that particular,
yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So in that particular instance, that person's right to have the thoughts they want and to project them onto that 5-year-old end where that 5-year-old's rights begin. And as a bystander walking by, I have every right in the non-aggression pact to defend that 5-year-old and that 5-year-old's rights. So I don't think that needs to be legislated by the government. I think that needs to come from a moral decision instilled in each one of us. And once we get to that point, trust me, that the person that's inflicting damage on that 5-year-old is going to get a far harsher penalty if Justin's walking by, if Andrew's walking by, or if Mike's walking by, as opposed to if the state of Kansas is the one who imposes that sentence. I guarantee you that all day long. And that's why I want less government, and let's put it back on us, the people.
Yeah, I think just for the simple fact of the deterrent factor, that can't fly. But I also think just to live in a safe society, like put yourself in that 5-year-old. I mean, I granted they're probably not thinking like this, but in a safe society, a 5-year-old knows that, you live in a society where you protect children, and instead of just leaving it up to a person to be like, hey, I don't feel like doing anything with this kid today. I think it's good that we do have laws that protect our kids, and I think that's a reflection of our morality. And I think that's a good thing.
But do those laws actually protect, or do those laws convict after the damage has already been done?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing you were saying about the murders. You're trying to, yeah, no, it definitely deters. I mean, for sure.
Yeah. Well, show me how many of the last 50 years worth of murders were stopped because the law was in place, and I'll agree with you.
No, I get what you're saying. It didn't stop those murders that happened, but doesn't.
But, a couple times here I've heard Andrew talking about if we could get back to the way things were back in the good days. And, we hear this time and time again through the generations. I heard it from my grandparents. I heard it, the 25-cent loaf of bread and gas was 10 cents a gallon, old boy, but number one, I personally don't believe that you can legislate those times to come back.
No.
And number two, I'll go so far as to say, as I don't think we as a society are ever going to get back to that. No, because I'm not saying that. That's part of progress, is we leave those things behind and we move on to something else.
Yeah, I don't necessarily go through the one. I don't think we have to necessarily always be progressing. I get as a progressive you would say that, but as a conservative you get why I would say that too. But I'm not saying that that the government should be legislating things like what you're talking about in terms of like instilling the way that we should be. I think that as a society we all, that there are certain truths about that. And I think that
but doesn't that translate into this constitutional amendment though? See, what I'm hearing is in some ways we're okay legislating, but in others you don't think government should be. And right. Same with Andrew, that there's areas where you think legislation does apply and other areas where you think maybe it doesn't. But can we not all three kind of agree that wherever government has gotten involved, it's not gone the way we the people expected it to go? So I'm inclined to agree with Andrew in his less government is a better approach. However, I can also see the aspect of the government's responsibility to protect those that are underprivileged, less fortunate. It's things like the Civil Rights Act, things like these things that need to happen. But where does what we're talking about legislating is already covered by laws. because we both talked about how it's
Right.
murder, and it's just a matter of are you able to hear me?
No, I am. I was
Okay.
pointing out that my cat was climbing up my curtain right then, and I thought it was
Oh.
the thing in the world.
No, but I'm wondering at what point isn't there enough legislation? I kind of agree with that, is because murder is already illegal. So
Mhm.
if you're wanting to protect an unborn child, then the way to approach that would be to protect that from murder, which is already on the statute. So that would be defining the life of the unborn child. And Justin, if in the conversations that I've had with you, and though we have different opinions on this, you better bring it back to a science argument that's pretty deep. And it's tough to argue with, honestly. But how do you balance those two for the woman's rights at the same time? Now, I want to get back to this constitutional amendment, though, because it's about the fact that they're not actually banning the abortion.
Mhm.
It's the law that they're putting in, saying that we are allowed to legislate more.
Right. So no. So you mentioned the women's right. Pretty simple. I don't think we have a right to kill. So I don't think that women's have a right to abortion. I think that that's true for everyone. Since I think it's murder, I think that's true for everyone. I have a right to do that.
Including rape, incest, and the other forcible things that the woman has no choice in.
Yeah.
I believe two rights or two wrongs don't make a right, if you will. So the incest was wrong, the rape was wrong. We're all going to be in agreement on that. If you follow that up with murder, how does that justify and equal out? I don't believe it can. And
But
so,
but even if we did think that two wrongs did make a right, even if we did think that, I still would be against it, because I just don't think that human life has anything to do with what's about to happen, and and suffers the ultimate consequence for nothing that it did. And I just don't think. I just think that we're going back to this government and morality. I'm not saying we need bigger government to regulate our morality. I'm saying we need to live in a government where we can't get the basic stuff down. I think we should all be able to agree on that killing a baby is wrong.
But I think we do.
Yes.
Yeah, oh no, I get that, but I'm talking using that example, but other things as well, like protecting children, all like from sexual abuse. I mean, those things we have to know that they're wrong, and I think that. So I'm not saying that government needs to come in and expand and try to shape everything about us. No. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that. When it comes to those things, that I think that in a just society, in a fair society where we all want to be able to live and not have to worry about being harmed by other people for no reason, I think the government definitely plays a role. If nothing else, like we talked about earlier, the punishment for the deterrent alone, I think the government has a role in that, and I think we should be proud of that. I think that we should know that we live in a society where we value and we look down upon those that sin against our societal values, and we go, oh, you need to be punished for that.
Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
When you see Lawrence PD pull up when you're on the side of the street holding your sign,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel like they're showing up to support and defend your rights, or do you think it's more likely when you see them that you're a bit hesitant because you think the handcuffs are getting ready to come out?
I think the latter. I think the handcuffs are going to come out, but I think that I think that's the difference between theory and practice. I think in theory, yeah, but not even necessarily theory and practice, but possibly. But I mean, just from like a societal standpoint, us knowing that we live in a society where at least that is in place. I mean, we can agree that the government's there to protect against murder and some of the things we've been talking about. But when the cops show up on the micro level, no, it's so far removed possibly from that theory or that ideal that we're supposed to be striving towards, that who knows what you're getting.
Exactly.
I used to think that you were getting somebody that was honest and a straight shooter and knew a little bit about their job. And I mean, I wasn't going as far as, like, I don't know if you remember what LeBron James said at the beginning of that when George Floyd got murdered. He basically said, if a cop wakes up you never know if they wake up on a wrong day and they just want to shoot. I don't think that. I think that's ridiculous, but I have learned that,
No,
yeah,
we've seen that play out. There's a lot of guys on YouTube that the officers come back and apologize and said, "Hey, it's not your fault. I had a really shitty encounter at home, and you were right. I was being an asshole. I shouldn't have brought that to work."
no,
That has
I'm
never once happened in my experience, not
Well,
once.
no, not in your experience. I'm saying it's been documented those few rare unicorn times on YouTube.
no,
And so
what I'm saying is I don't agree with to the extent that a cop says he has a bad day and shoots somebody. It doesn't happen all the time. I just don't think that reality bears that out. But what I'm saying is, yeah, of course, humans get involved in it, right? I mean, it's all humans. So yeah, a bad day does come into it, not in terms of like I'm going to shoot somebody. Possibly it does, but I'm saying not like LeBron James hitting that. But in terms of like you're saying, rolling up and putting the cuffs on someone when they shouldn't. Yeah, I agree with all that. But I think that's better than that. I think that that's at least something that we can at least work with, rather than not having a government that doesn't reflect those kind of things that those, corrupt politicians and those corrupt law enforcement officers should be enforcing. I don't think that means that the system needs to be burned down. Not at all.
So here's my issue. You and I agree wholeheartedly that murder is wrong. All three of us agree murder is wrong. Justin and I wholeheartedly believe that murder of a baby, and I believe, I don't know, I haven't heard your definition, but I believe life begins at conception. I believe you do as well. And so abortion at any level for any reason is stopping that life that was created. And in our opinion, that's wrong. Here's the issue. The United States government was specifically designed to stand up for Justin's rights, Andrew's rights, and Mike's rights. The government is the number one issue when it comes to civil rights. You will find more complaints against the United States government or against the state governments than you will find against private industry. The other issue is that more people, more lives, whether they were pre-birth lives or whether they were post-birth lives, have ended at the hands of their governments, the one group that was charged with protecting and defending them in the last 100 years, than from any private source out there. Any amount of gun violence, any amount of abortion doctors, everything else have ended at the hands of their own government, including ours, the United States government. And so I think there's a bigger, more systemic issue that can be discussed rather than this particular amendment. But yeah, that's where I think we need to bring morality back into life, as opposed to let's bring in more government trying to emulate that.
Right. So Justin, any change in your opinion at all?
No, because when I look at that, I look at the. I think it's important to note that there's just no right to this, and I get what you're saying, and I think it's a good point. But I just knowing that there's, to do away with this idea that there's a right to an abortion, or there's a right to end a life. That's the way that should be. I just think that when it gets talked about in terms of having this right to an abortion, it's not talking about what there's no right to that. So that's kind of like there's like a false flag kind of sort of there, where you're saying that there's this right to it. So not that you guys are, but I think the left's argument is that there's this right to an abortion, and I just, there's not, there never was. And so it's good that's being recognized.
Well, and more about the intrusion of government. Any last thoughts on the intrusion of government before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I see your point on what you're saying in terms of like, because it's not defined how it's going to be regulated, that it obviously then it leaves it up to the government, whoever is going to pick this up and regulate it. Yeah, I get that. And I think that's a good point. And it doesn't change my mind on how I'm going to vote though, but yeah.
Okay. Now you guys started talking about when the police walk up and put handcuffs on you. And that's a perfect segue into discussing the topic. Andrew, you wanted to discuss this one, and I think it's a great topic to discuss. What we saw in Uvalde, Texas,
Yep.
A few weeks ago with the hundreds of officers that showed up, and the restraint, the fear. You could call it just about any number of things, but in any case, people died, and they didn't really move in to do anything about it. And then we look at the difference between that situation and what happened in Indiana a couple weeks later, where there was a person in a mall that came out of a bathroom, started shooting, and a young man, I think he was 18, Andrew, is that right?
He was 21.
He was
and he had
21.
just turned 21. So he had had his government authorization to carry his concealed weapon, I believe, for 2 weeks at the time that this occurred.
But this young man who had very little training, had never been in the military from what I understand, didn't have any professional weapons training of that sort, didn't have a law enforcement officer's certification, had never been to any kind of a law enforcement academy or anything from what I understand. He stopped that gunman by himself from 40 yards.
Seconds. Within 10 seconds of the initial shot ringing out from the perpetrator. Yeah.
Andrew, I mean, I'm going to turn it over to you, man. You showed me a couple things that you wanted to talk about here. Let's get on it.
Well, and that's where I just want to take the opportunity. Let me share the screen here and bring up the vast difference between having the government in charge of our security and us being in charge of our own security. I mean, we've got right here reports on Uvalde shooting find systemic failures in police response. And with my own history, my own training in this, I was in law enforcement. In 2006 is when I went to the academy, and I believe I participated in 3 active shooter trainings in my short-term history in law enforcement. They would be an all-day event. They'd take place at different surrounding schools. There were varying degrees. It was all training that was brought down at the federal level. But so let's say that was happening since 2006. So we're easily 16 years into these trainings being a required part and being a very common part of the education and training. When this incident first happened, there was multiple information coming out saying we have to err on the side of caution for the officers. The officers said they didn't have appropriate weaponry to go after. They didn't have appropriate PPE or personal protective equipment to go after. Our radios weren't communicating. You got to look at all these issues that they came out talking about. And then just to contrast that with this individual here, and I got to be honest, this is CNN. This is the most authoritative source that you can ever get any information from, in my humble opinion.
Bleeding sarcasm.
Many more people would have died. I can see people at CNN crying as they were typing this out, just to put that out there. Armed bystander killed gunman who had 3 guns, 100 rounds of ammunition. And you gotta keep in mind, this guy was 21 years old, or no, 20-year-old. A 20-year-old man. Okay, that was the perpetrator. The Elijah Dickinson, 22, of Seymour, Indiana, fired 10 shots at the gunman from his Glock handgun, preventing many more deaths, Eisen said at a press conference. And I've heard, I think he was 40 yards at the point, and it may have been closer, but the first thing he did from the interview I saw on television showed that he got his girlfriend down in a safe position, and then he started advancing towards the shooter. And for a 22-year-old to have that level of calmness and that level of affirmation, put himself in harm, and
Courage.
within 10 seconds, do what?
Courage.
Courage, yes. With no training. He clearly had training in his gun and how to operate it, but he had never had the stress training that these hundreds of officers at Uvalde that showed up have been required to go through, that was funded by yours and my tax money. They got paid all-day events to go out and play with their paintball guns and to act like big, bad, macho men. But yet when SHTF happens, they cower down. This 22-year-old stood up. And it's not just this 22-year-old young man going after this unknown individual with a much powerful weapon. You got to understand what's going through this 22-year-old's mind. Am I accidentally going to hit the wrong person? Am I going to be sued? Is this going to affect the rest of my life? But to put all of that out of your memory and advance into the threat of, which has to be the greatest fear in the world, and to drop them and put them down. I just want to hear your guys' opinion on, was the bigger government better? We saw hundreds of officers show up. We saw long guns within minutes of them arriving at the school. We saw they had shields right away. They had some of the best gear, the best training that could have happened. And yet over an hour, they let kids get slaughtered, where this individual on his own accord managed to put down the threat. And according to CNN, saved countless individuals.
Well, I'm going to chime in on this one first, because this is a passion of mine. The two things I'm going to note on this: number one, the young man shot 10 shots. That means he didn't probably have a reload with him. He wasn't carrying 4 or 5 clips, and he also didn't have an extended clip or an extended magazine.
And didn't have the shield to hide behind.
Right. But my point is that he didn't need 60 or 90 bullets to end this. And that's the one thing that I've been kind of railing on lately, is that what we're seeing is too many times officers, they're going to come heavy or they're not going to come. And I've had police tell me, if I think it's going to take 3, I'm going to bring 5. And I've been on a scene where another officer has told me that we were outnumbered. It wasn't worth our time. And it seemed to be, this officer safety thing has gone too far. And,
yeah.
you know, when you talk about the man saying to himself, you know, having to think about the things that he was thinking, and talk about, sorry guys, for some reason when I'm speaking, it doesn't actually trip over to me. So when I'm speaking, I have to be this way. But you talked about the things that he was probably having to think about. I don't think he actually thought about getting sued. I don't think he hesitated about thinking about who he was going to hit. I think those kind of reactions come from a different place. It's not a think it through and act. And I think that's what happened in Uvalde, is they thought through it and they decided the best course of action was to go home safely. And whereas this man, he was in a situation where his life was on the line as well, and he took action to stop it. But I don't think he thought about being sued. I don't think he thought about accidentally shooting somebody else. I think he saw a threat and he knew that he had the capacity to take it down.
So what do you guys think explains that lack of courage? What's at the core, the heart of those officers down there? Like, instead of reacting, why are they standing around thinking it through?
Andrew?
I'm trying to think about that, because going back in my own training, the whole point and purpose to having these trainings and having these trainings every 6 months is to instill in each individual officer that regardless, if you are the first person to show up, so this broadcast is going to go out countywide that there is an active shooter. You're going to have a local PD officer arriving first, and chances are he's the only one in the town. You've got backup coming from the county sheriff's office. You've got backup coming from the state highway patrol, as well as the, out here in Kansas, we have the Kansas wildlife officers who are out and about, 1 per county or so. So you've got these guys coming. And in any other instance, if this was an armed gunman that's barricaded, you're going to post up and keep that person in that house until all of your blue line buddies show up, and now you've got the numbers, and you'll go in and get them. The whole idea of this training specifically is to instill in every officer, and they actually run you through the scenario as though you're officer.
I want to pause, because you said barricaded gunman. This was not a barricaded gunman. It was an active shooter.
Well, yeah, I don't know if it's split out there, but the point is, you understand that your backup is coming. And for one, you have time to wait. And so you can wait for all of your blue line guys to show up. But the whole point of this training, if you go back and watch what I said specifically, the whole point of this training is that if you're officer number 1 to show up, you're officer number 1 to go in. If you're officer number 2 to show up, you're officer number 2 to go in. You advance towards the gunshots. Where you hear the gunshots coming from, you go towards that location. If you've got your Glock, if you've got your shotgun, if you have an AR, if you've got these weapons, you'll take them out of your car and be whatever number you showed up, that's what number you're going in. And if the gunshots are still going off, you're still showing up and going in the order you get there. And they teach this training specifically so that the gunman is confronted first thing on. The study showed, at least back when I went through the training, was that a gunman who is shown an oppositional force, at the very minimum, they stop shooting bystanders. Now they're shooting one-on-one with another gun, and so innocent people stop dying. So
Is that
you interact?
wow, is that me?
What?
I heard a lot of feedback there. But that what you just said there about the fact that when they go in, the first thing that happens is now they're not shooting bystanders. Now it's a one-on-one. Is that why? And then my next question is that
Well,
why
I
they
don't
didn't go
believe
in?
I don't believe that's what happened here. They teach this training and they do this training over and over, and they do that specifically so that this is muscle memory. This no longer has to do with the individual officer thinking, okay, what should I do? They teach this training and they teach it in a specific way so that when that call goes out, you do this, this, and this. I guarantee you, cowering and running is never a part of that training. So what we have to figure out at this point is, why did they cower and run? The training has been there for 20 years that you show up, you confront the gunman with an army of one, or you confront the gunman with an army of whoever was there first to show up, and you put them down. You don't think about that individual. If the gunshots are going off, you meet with them and you put that target down. And so that's where we now have to come up with what was the issue with 100 officers waiting an hour to go in and do that versus an individual that's never had that training that just instinctively went towards the fear and did it.
Yeah, that was my question to you. What do you think explains their cowardice?
And
Huh?
I wish I knew.
We don't have any guesses. do we think it's a bigger societal issue, maybe, of men, of just general lack of courage in our day-to-day? Do you think the internet has anything to do with it? Do you think,
I mean, personally, I think
feminism has anything to do with it? Do you think?
Well, and so here's another aspect to it. You know, why in that video that we watched did we only see law enforcement officers showing up in that hallway and cowering down? Because I have to want to trust in my heart that if Dr. Justin was teaching in the next class over, he would have grabbed a pencil and gone in and tried to stab the guy in the neck. You know, if I was a parent, my kids were there, I would be livid that the teachers, the other grown adults in the building, didn't even attempt.
Well, and that's the other thing. We saw the parent, and there's even been reports later that she's being harassed because she basically made the cops look bad. They were trying to tackle her and hold her back, and at one point they had her in cuffs, and when they let her out of cuffs, she ran in and got kids out. You know, that where, and I think Justin asked a good question: where in the training is the fall through on that? Where did it fall through the cracks in the training that these guys weren't exposed as not having the right mindset, not having the right backbone, not having the right whatever it takes to be able to run into that school? And then my other question is going to be, Andrew, are you not sure that this isn't part of your, you know, your thought that the police should be the Andy Griffith, you know, lay down your life for your community kind of person, and reality says that, you know, the cops are just the best person they could happen to hire today?
So my thought is, anytime we trust that the government is going to be there to protect us, that's the wrong mindset to have. I think that each one of us is in charge of our own security, and that also goes to our kids in school. I also don't agree with the education that's being taught in the same schools, but I don't think that putting the sole security in the hands of government has ever shown that they're going to be the ones to defend our liberties or our lives, for that matter. And I think this was a perfect example of just that. When the time came, they had all the education that they could have asked for. They had all the funding, they had all the weapons, they had everything except for the one thing that money couldn't buy, and that was the courage. Money cannot buy courage.
Well, and I've heard police training people talk about the difficulty in measuring unmeasurable personality traits. So if you had to design a system to be able to measure courage in a young recruit officer at KLETC, do you have any suggestions on that? Is there something that might do something like that?
Well, let's look at Dodge City back in the Wyatt Earp days. They did a pretty good job of selecting the right guys then. So,
Well, sometimes that was the last guy standing, though.
I mean, I honestly don't know how you go about measuring that. I definitely know you can't legislate it. You can't teach it. That's something that comes from, I think, back to the family, back to the community. I think that's what Justin and I were talking about earlier. And that's why I personally feel that bigger government is not the answer, but we need to revert towards a smaller government where each one of us as individuals have more freedom, but we also have more responsibility as individuals of this country.
Justin, I want to put it to you as the lifespan human development guy.
Yeah.
You tell us, is there a way to measure courage?
Well, I think that just to point out real quick there, you said, I think you can teach courage. You said it can't be taught. I think you can definitely teach courage. I think it's something I think it's something that's definitely learned, and I think that it's also something that's unlearned or the opposite of that. I think cowardice can be taught as well. I think we look around all these examples of the society we live in. I mean, you start off, Michael, by saying, you know, this idea of officer safety, you know, and it's everywhere. It's making sure our kids are, you know, safe at all costs. I saw this meme the other day, one of those merry-go-round things you'd see at a playground, like, you know, when we were kids, those steel death traps you hop on, and you'd hop in, everyone would just run it around and spin, everyone would go flying off. I'm just things like those no longer exist, and we live in a society where our safety is the number one feature now. And I get, like, maybe a lot of these cops didn't grow up in that generation. Some of them certainly have, but we're all observing this society kind of rapidly change where men are just, and I don't think it was just men that were lacking courage, but I think that men can definitely teach each other courage. I think we definitely have that. And I don't even mean like, how do we teach each other courage to run into a building? I think that, you know, to defend children like that goes against our DNA not to run in there. But I mean, you teach courage by doing it in your own personal life and setting an example of standing up for things that are right. I mean actively standing up and having courage. I think the internet has made us feel like we're more courageous than we are, but we know when we're just tweeting and typing stuff, we're not actually as courageous as we really would be in person. And I think that our lack of kind of confronting each other like that is taking away our courage as well, our courage to use our voice, our courage to stand up, stuff like that. So I think it's a societal issue. I do think that if they were training every single day, that it would be their reflexes would have kicked in a little bit more. But I think that if we're talking about courage itself, that we all need to, and how we change it, we all need to look in the mirror and be like, am I setting a good example for this stuff? I mean, for the kind of, you know, courage that I want to see others exhibit in society. Like when I was standing out on the corner one day, out in the wide open air protesting, a cop, you know, the cops got called, and the cop shows up and he's wearing 2 masks, not one, but 2 masks. And I just look at that and I'm like, hey, that does not scream courage. And I told him straight up to his face, I was like, this is why I told him at the time, my wife and my daughter, don't worry about calling you guys. You know, we got to take care of it ourselves, because where are we going to expect you to go running into the house and save us? You're wearing 2 masks. I'm saying it's those kind of things where we are saying it's acceptable for men, or even, you know, authority figures, to be such cowards openly, and it's accepted, and nobody challenges it, and nobody, you know, I don't know, man. It kind of goes back to what you talked about earlier, Michael, about, you know, being progressive, and I think we've progressed away from what it means to have all those kind of traits we were just talking about. I think it's a good thing to have. You know, I think it's a good thing to have courage. I think it's a good thing to have confidence. I think it's a good thing to have conviction. I think we've all strayed away from those things. And we just need to do a better job on the individual level. And I think that'll impact each other more. And then it'll branch out.
You know, I think the younger generation would argue with that about having courage and conviction and stuff, because, you know, they're going to come right back at us and say they're having the courage and conviction to go against everything that their parents believe and such as that. But and each generation measures each other differently. I remember my grandparents, just like I said before, looking down on the younger generation. My wife and I now look down on the younger generation the same way my grandparents did. But I guess I want to draw it back to, in your experience in human development and human emotion and such as this, is there a way to identify courageous traits in a potential law enforcement officer? Is there a way to identify somebody who applies at KLETC to get a law enforcement certification? Is there a way to identify, yes, this officer is X percentage likely to drop his gun and run if somebody points at him wrong?
I don't know about an X percentage, but I think that there are traits that would transfer over to identifying what's more likely. It doesn't mean there's any guarantee. So I think of just something like, I don't know, something like their levels of how they look at like things like fairness and justice, and how they their confidence levels or their self-esteem, those kind of things. Because and why I mentioned those in time back to Uvalde, I think that a lot of those things came into place where nobody wanted to be the one that made the decision, so they're always trying to pass the buck up to somebody else to make the decision for everybody to go in, and that's cowardice as well. And part of that, I don't want to have the fallout on me to look bad that I made the wrong decision. Well, that's why I was talking about things like confidence or self-esteem. Like you know that you need to make that decision, might be more likely to in that situation. But again, like I don't think there's any guarantee. But I'm sure. And no, those aren't from like the actual like personality traits necessarily, but characteristics within each of those five characteristics.
Andrew, are those things looked at KLETC in your experience when you went through?
When I went through, no, but I would like to point out that there was a government-sponsored program that looked specifically into what we're talking about tonight. I believe it was commonly referred to as the Hitler Youth Program, and I would like not to go back to any form of that, whether it's the United States or the Nazis looking into that. I want our morality to come from us individually, and once again, not have the government attempt to do that. But no, the whole reason I'm laughing over here is because, yes, the Nazi youth program specifically delved into these issues and tried to get courage built into the children so that as soon as they were of military age, they had the mindset, they had the yes sir attitude, and they just fit right into the ranks. So
well, no, and I wouldn't
want the government to be having that role.
Yeah, no, and I definitely wouldn't support something like that. What I'm referring to is more of, you have the adult candidate that wants to be a police officer. Is there a way to evaluate that individual and determine whether they actually have the courage to put their life down if it comes time to it?
Having been in situations, I've never shot anybody. I've never been part of an active shooter situation. I've been called to gun calls. You don't know how you're going to react until you're in that position. I mean, that's common, and it doesn't matter what that position is. The first time you meet Mike with a camera on the street, you don't know how you're going to react. Just ask some of the Lawrence PD officers. Some react good, some react like assholes. You never know in that instance how you're going to respond until you're there, and until you're faced with that. What decision am I going to make? And that's what it comes down to. We all, as individuals, have a responsibility, and that's where having the morality as individuals is important. If you're an immoral person wearing a badge, you're going to treat Mike like a piece of shit and you're not going to respect his rights. If you have morality and you understand I need to have a servant's heart for the public service job I'm doing, and you show up, hey, guys, ignore him. He's not part of this. He's just here to document. That's his right, and you go on. And that's where you actually see this issue come up. And I don't think you're going to be able to necessarily prejudge that ahead of time until that person's in that position. And like I said, it just scares the shit out of me when I hear that the Nazi youth program was looking to instill courage and to put these traits in, and we saw where that led to. So,
I think there's I don't know, man. I think that it might be something bigger than just like identifying what might be courageous. When I look at Uvalde, like the thing that kind of jumps out to me is that it almost seems like it's in our DNA to want to protect kids and rescue kids. That's why I never understood why nobody would want to run in there. Like you'd almost be fighting your own cellular, on a personal level. Like, you want to go in and protect those kids, and you're like wrestling. Like, I don't want to go in there. I don't want to go. I don't understand how that happens. And I think that that's an indication that there's something seriously wrong. And I think for no other reason, going back to morals, wouldn't you rather die? I mean, aren't you like, that's like the ultimate scenario, right? You die rescuing kids rather than living as a coward that stayed out in the hall. I mean, don't we all rush to that knowing that, yeah, I'm probably going to die, but man, people are going to say, damn, man, that guy was fucking awesome, instead of
Yeah.
that guy's a fucking coward loser. And he's probably not going to be able to live with that shit for the rest of his life. The regret and the kids, why not go in there?
Well,
And
I think you're bringing
that's
up
what
a valid
honor.
point.
That's what honor is, and I think that's what honor and courage go hand in hand. They
We used
really
to have
do.
shame in this country too, and if you watch any of the demonstrations out of New York, there is no shame
Fuck
of
no.
any of the parades in New York. So I agree with exactly what you're saying, but the
It's our,
difference you
it's our
have,
degenerating society. And I not to say anything against you, Michael, but it's the progressive. The thing about progressivism, it has no anchoring. By definition, has no anchoring moral or guiding light. It is always whatever is that day is what's, it's always moving away from it. But with conservative, it's anchored in this, and it's holding on to that. That's what it means to conserve, and it's been painted as a bad thing, but no, it's a good thing, especially when we're talking about things that we're talking about right here. We don't want our morals to progress so far away from honor that we're cowards, and that's what's happening. It seems like, I don't know.
so I have to play devil's advocate here and just go after you, Justin, because, well, why not? Is it progress or is it Congress that's the issue? I would argue that Congress is the problem, trying to legislate all these morals and trying to pass more laws to fix issues that the laws don't fix, and that Congress is where we end up with issues, not trying to progress. And I don't agree with the progressive movement, but if you look at the names and exactly what they imply, I see more issues with Congress than I do the progressive individuals I've come across.
I mean, maybe for you, but I see I definitely see the left progressives trying to legislate their morals all the time, and I don't think that's.
But it hasn't gotten us any better in society, and that would be my point.
No.
That's
Well,
Yeah.
and I have to chime in and say I disagree with the progressives legislating morals, because when talking about the constitutional amendment, when progressive approached this, nothing in the progressive platform ever forces a conservative woman to have an abortion, because she
Yeah.
always has the choice to keep that child.
at this time. But let's go and look what China did.
Well, I think China is an extreme example that would never fly in this country. And if
We
it
would
did
hope.
fly in this country, we better have a hell of an overpopulation problem.
But that's my point. One of my points with abortion, man. If they can get you to be on board with abortion and think that's okay, man, they can get you to believe anything.
Well, see,
Anyway.
that's my issue with you. You're voting yes for some abortion as opposed to voting no and keeping the Constitution the way it is. But no, I think you and I personally agree. But I think a vote for yes is not just a vote for limiting, but it's also a vote for allowing this section while you limit this section, which is still a vote for abortion. So,
All right, yeah, I mean, yeah, and we've talked about that, but what I just want to make this quick point about China never being able to seep in here, and it goes back to our morals. And if they can get you to believe that abortion isn't murdering a baby, or that it's somehow justified, or somehow it's okay, there's nothing worse that you can believe. And to
So why is it? I just noticed this. Why is it we were talking about police, and then I said the word progressive, and we started talking about abortion again?
they're all tied. They're all big government. They all tie back into each other.
Well, we were talking about morals, and I was just using the example of how progressives, by definition, will want to move away from things that were considered however long ago. It could even be today. As fast as progressives move away from things, whatever the flavor of the.
Well, so if we go back far enough, we can find conservative values that declare the woman property and the child property. And there's even some conservative sects that allow the child to be killed up to 2 years old. So, I mean, the line has been drawn in a number of different places throughout history, and it's not just been about the science of it either. And so when you draw from some aspects of history and you don't realize the impacts of the rest of those aspects from the same history, then I think it's making a false equivalency, because we can draw from way back when, and we can come up with some pretty screwed up stuff. What was it we were discussing the other day, where in Missouri it is actually illegal for a wife to divorce her husband if she's pregnant in Missouri?
Who was discussing that?
I was discussing it maybe with my wife and a couple other people, but it was the aspect of, in Missouri, it's illegal for a wife to divorce her husband. She can't be divorced while she's pregnant.
Huh.
And you know, would you have thought that if somebody came up and told you that and you didn't know them?
Oh, absolutely not. And I don't actually see how that fits in with the Christian faith at all, with the teachings as I know them, which is usually how you can find some of these seemingly archaic laws, is because they delve towards one religion or another. But that one does kind of surprise me, having come out of Missouri. I mean, I spent the last 10 years living in Missouri, so.
Well, some of my family's from Missouri, and it doesn't surprise me a bit. So they sell fireworks at propane stands down there.
Well, of course, job security.
And I'm not necessarily, when I talk about like progressivism and conservatism, I'm not saying like never moving away from every single tiny issue or holding on to every single. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying for like, you know, the not necessarily the bigger things. I'm not saying bigger things, but maybe the more like general kind of concepts of things like honor and perhaps even things like family. I think teaching in the family and human service department, I think that, you know, I think it's a good thing to have an idea of what, you know, I think there's something that's okay about a traditional family, but it's being kind of taught that that's not necessarily the case, and it makes it more. We're progressing away from this kind of this ideal family, and it's almost controversial to say, well, who are you to say what's a good family or not? But that what I'm saying is that progressivism has allowed us to move away from even saying that there's a good thing about having a traditional family, and that, you know, they say that all families are, you know, essentially the same, and, you know, it just doesn't bear out that way. There are a lot of issues in society that are contributed to the breakup of the family. You know, I'd say most all issues come from that, and so I think that two parenting homes is a good thing, and so that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about when I say like we're moving away from it, like moving away from not letting a pregnant lady divorce her husband in Missouri. Yeah, I mean that's fine, but I'm talking about like societal, you know, bigger societal things like that, like what we can all agree on. And I don't think we can agree on that anymore. I think we've moved away from it so far.
But the
Can I
idea
ask
that
a silly question of you?
go ahead.
I'm just curious. Your whole career was based in the post-education system, and how did somebody with such conservative beliefs survive as long as you did in that environment? I mean, even going through and getting the training you had,
It ended his career.
and well, I know it ended it, but I'm saying, how did you go through the training that got you to that point and then survive as long as you did and retain those, you know, values?
Well, yeah, I kept my head down as much as I could, and not anything intentional, but I could see a lot of this stuff getting kind of bizarre. I could see it happening because I was basically in school from 2007 to 2018, and for me, anyways, right around 2012, 2013, you could really start to see just the craziness talk of race and inequality and oppression and feminism. I mean, it was always there, but it really came on the scene. And I tried to keep my head down. Now, that's not to say that I didn't believe some of that stuff. I have some liberal views that more so then, but even more now, or less now, but even still some liberal views. Even as being a conservative, and because you know, some of and the reason why I say that I have some of those liberal beliefs is because my work as a therapist, now I think therapy is a contributing factor to how messed up society is. I think it's created a bunch of wusses. You know, everyone has to be valid, everyone's right, and they can't be wrong, and they can't help themselves, there's no responsibility, and anything goes, and all that stuff. But, you know, working in specifically in the sexual trauma, sexual abuse area, there are some concepts from the left and in postmodernism that do apply to that. And just because I say that doesn't mean that now it needs to go everywhere like it has. I think there's a place for it, and there was a place for it, and I believe those things to be true. But now I look back and go, yeah, those are true in there, but I could never identify with those on a larger scale because they've been hijacked. Some of those things that fit for helping specifically for survivors of sexual abuse have been hijacked and applied to society at large. And I think that's a bad thing. Specifically, what am I talking about? I'm talking about things like this idea of empowerment, this idea of not having or empowerment is a good thing for sexual abuse, but it kind of gets labeled to always being empowered. Being validated nonstop. I mean, being validated in sexual trauma is a good thing, but it's been applied to a wider range. So I do believe a lot of those liberal things, but none enough to, to skew my whole general view of society. If any of that.
I've got to go back on my training and education. You got to understand, I grew up on a farm, and a fairly conservative farm, but we raised all different types of crops. We had cattle and we had a dairy. It was a well-rounded farm. And I remember when I went off to college, I was liberal compared to what my Christian parents, my upbringing was. And I'm a college kid. I'm getting ready to go off, and I go to Hayes. And my freshman year was a breeze. I absolutely loved it. It was great. My sophomore year, I was a little drunk when it came time to trying to get my classes in order, and I may not have done it on time. And by the time it came around to getting my English class lined up, I was getting into English Comp 2, and it had the title of environmental ethics. And I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell? English Comp 2, I'm learning to write. I'm learning to read. I'm learning, how does environmental ethics have anything to do with my comprehension of English and how to read and write? And yeah, that was kind of my beginning spew into it, and I quickly got out. There was no way I could handle that. I remember I was sitting there having an issue with the instructor, so I'm standing outside the door waiting for her to open the door from the last class, and this gal comes up, and I'm telling her, wow, can you believe this lady in here? Do you believe what she's saying? And about that time, the classroom door opens up, and she says, oh, hi, honey. Did you get out of class early? I'm thinking, oh, great, foot and mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
let me just mention one other thing about that, because I thought that was a really good question, man, asking about, the life in the university and how, the liberal university. And when I first started to got my first kind of teaching experiences as a graduate student, I was fortunate to have been assigned under two PhDs, well, one PhD student in particular, who was Mormon, and actually had a lot of interaction with Mormons around there. I'm not Mormon or anything, but what they taught me is kind of the value of right and wrong, and how in the college classroom that can be applied and taught. Because what would happen is, in any kind of question, there's always this kind of, and this has influenced me as a teacher and how I taught. There's this kind of this standard answer for college students to say, I don't know, it depends, or it depends. So they don't want to go either left or right on. They want to be in the safety of, it depends. It could go either way. I don't know. It depends. But to always hold people to it. No, take a stand, take a position, whether you're right or end up being wrong, take a stand. There's none of this, it depends. And so that's what I was talking about, like the liberal postmodernism. And that's what postmodernism is like, anything goes, it depends. Who am I to say what's right or wrong? But I think, and this all goes back into this kind of teaching courage thing, is holding people to their feet to the fire. Like take a position, take a stand. It's okay to say like something that might not be popular. It's okay to say something that might make people, think less of you. But if it's the truth, you should do it, not go with the safe spot of in the middle. Like it depends. And I think this idea of a safe spot or safe zone, the literal, literally like a safe zone on college, but also there's just safe zone everywhere we go. Like, I don't be in a safe zone. I don't want to stand up for this. I don't want to stand up for that, because it's safe here in the middle. And I think that's all part of this, to go back to that lack of courage. Standing up for what we believe in takes courage. And if we would do that more often, we'd have a lot more courage in society, I believe.
all right.
Yeah.
Guys, I think that went really well. I appreciate it. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to corner you and make you take a stand. So, Andrew, is Pavlov's dog alive or dead?
Oh, very much alive. How many people have gotten a paycheck in the last 2 years that came from the federal government? Yeah, they all salivated for it.
Justin?
What does that mean?
Well,
Oh,
we
come on
got
now.
the stimulus checks and
What about it?
did what we were supposed to, and went out and spent that free money.
What about it though? How does that Pavlov's dog? Like training us to go off the government? Is that what you're saying?
Try us to be more communistic as opposed to go out and do for ourselves. And
Well, where they failed is that they didn't give us enough stimulus checks. The one or two that we got wasn't enough to get people, on to clench on for good. If it would have been
Well,
more
it made enough. It made a lot of people quit their jobs. Apparently,
For
their
sure.
Great Resignation.
and
For
go
sure.
further into debt and rely on government just that little bit more.
You just mentioned a key word here. Further into debt. I keep talking about this. I'm gonna hit on this real quick. I want people to look back and see what happens with the debt when inflation hits and the inflation controls start to kick in.
Oh yeah.
And that's what you're seeing right now. And if you're not old enough to remember it, look back to the 70s and 80s and see what happens when the inflation controls started to kick in. Those that had debt lost everything. Those that had money had more money at the end. And
You
no,
do
really,
remember you're the liberal in this conversation, right?
I do.
Okay. Just
I
want to
do.
make sure you remember to play your role.
But see, here's the thing, and I've told people this before. I am a social liberal and a fiscal social liberal and a fiscal conservative. I believe that we need to quit spending so much money to get in people's bedrooms. So it's pretty simple that way. But tax policy is going to kill us if we don't get out of debt.
Very much so.
Guys, I appreciate it. I got to get this out, and we'll. I look forward to doing this again.
Oh yeah.
Me
I
too.
appreciate you having us. It's a great time to talk.
I think it's a good conversation, and if there's anybody out there that sees this that wants to get involved, reach out. If you want to be the fourth person on the screen and share an opinion and discuss the issues, we're not here to fight about it. We're here to discuss and try to understand the other side's viewpoint. I don't
Well,
think
and
Justin changes.
if we get a few more boxes, we could have the Brady Bunch going.
Well, I got these things in here. I'm going to go ahead and do this because I got to make sure everybody gets to see this, because I'm learning how to do this streaming thing. I've got this cool little thing here now that I can do. There we go. So it's like Sports Center combined with Roosevelt's fireside chat.
Yep. Let's just stoke that fire just a little bit because that's what we need right now.
That's right. How about the fist bump?
Yeah. No, you're over here. Nope, you're over here.
Yeah, look at him. All right, guys. Have a good night. Appreciate you. I'm going to stop the recording.